Hello and welcome back to the latest season of the Publisher Podcast from Media Voices. I'm Esther Thorpe.
And I'm Peter Houston.
And today's interview is with Ben Smith, the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Semafor. So he's worked as a media columnist at places like the New York Times. Prior to that, he was editor-in-chief for BuzzFeed. We can't really say RIP BuzzFeed just yet, but...
Oh.
But what I really wanted to do with this interview is get into the weeds of what's changed in modern media business models. You know, this guy's got a lot of experience with that. What opportunity they saw to launch Semafor back in 2022 and what's kind of shifted with their strategy amid some of the massive changes that we're in the middle of navigating now.
Yeah, this was a big one when it launched.
I mean, we were very sceptical. We are on record about being very sceptical about this.
So I was just about to hold my hand up. We were sceptical. Okay, so they're almost 5 years in. Now seems like a good time to be talking to Semafor, but what were you after? What were you trying to get from Ben?
I think there's a really good case study here about launching a news business. Yeah, they launched in October 2022. The business of news at that point was, it was basically shot, wasn't it?
At that point.
Digital news. The industry didn't realise at the time, it was literally a month later ChatGPT launched, and that itself has, again, been a massive shift. It's a really crowded market. Competition is tough. I did ask Ben about the whole targeting the sort of globally educated. That is not an underserved market. But he quite rightly comes back and is like, but they're not happy with the product they've got. Yeah. So fair play to them. They managed to carve out space. They hit profitability last year. They did pioneer the Semafor article format, which again Ben will explain later on. And I'm trying not to roll my eyes, but again, fair play to them. They've actually done something new and good. It's brought in readership, trust, and money. And at the moment, they've done that without a paywall in sight. And I think they're asked about paywalls quite a lot because everybody else has them, right?
Yep, absolutely. I mean, they're fundamentally newsletter driven, right? It's really a lot of what they do is starts with a newsletter.
It's sort of almost Axios style.
I mean, the Semafor thing, it's a crappy name, but it's a great concept. It's basically trying to triangulate a story. And that's a good thing.
There's a lot of interesting stuff about how Semafor have really leaned into events. I know Amanda Barnes talked about this last week in our Faversham House interview. And yeah, this is off the back of they've literally just last week held their biggest world economy event in Washington over sort of 5 days. I don't know if events are sort of, if they saw events getting as big as they did. Again, Ben talks about this later. But as the opportunities have arisen, they've very much leaned into where the audience and where the revenue is. So fair play to them.
I'm not sure a 5-day event's enough to sort out the world economy at the moment.
Well, we were done after 2. Can you imagine the poor team after 5?
Oh, yeah. Probably got a bigger team. Talking about being done and having events and all the work that goes into them, there's still a few tickets left for Flashes and Flames Monetizing B2B event next month. So get over to flasesandflames.com and grab one of the last seats to hear from leaders at SIFT, TTG, the FT, and Informa. I mean, I think there's 30 speakers or panel members. That is a serious list of B2B luminaries. So get your ticket.
And our podcast awards have now closed. Sorry, a bit slow that if you haven't entered. But our newsletter awards are actually open for another week. So you can go to publishernewsletters.com right now and get your entries in for the Publisher Newsletter Awards. All of that will be held on July the 8th in Huxter in London.
Is this year just flashing by? July, we're talking about July. So looking at the news this week, I saw a story that I think ties in a lot with what Semafor is looking at with the whole quality idea. It was the story that I saw in our newsletter, which you should subscribe to because you see great stories. Press Gazette's reporting that the Times has seen page views go up as story counts went down. The news desk has cut the number of stories it publishes by 20 to 30%, 30% on the sports desk, but at the same time is actually gaining audience. I thought this was amazing. I'm working at the moment on a report about the impact of zero-click search. And this story, it really resonated with that whole thing. The one thing I've got so far working on this report is that zero-click search is complicated. But one definite way to mitigate the impact is to move away from commodity news, focus on original reporting, and that's what the Times is focused on here. It's seen organic search traffic to its website go up by nearly 30% year on year, based on its first priority being exclusive original reporting that you can't get anywhere else. That's a direct quote from Deputy Head Digital Anis Bottoni. They're also updating stories as they develop, live blogging, adding value, including clear calls to actions. And then the last one is watching the engagement as stories go on, so they're not, flogging a dead horse kind of idea. But I just thought that story, in a world where we're worried about traffic falling off a cliff, I thought that story was a real ray of hope.
It's great. It's really, really wonderful. I'm slightly cautious of what message other people will be taking from that.
Go on.
Of okay, so if we're looking to increase our traffic, this is what we need to do. But if that is investing in quality journalism, that can only be of benefit, right? That's...
Well, the one thing she says right at the top of that story is there has been no reduction in headcount.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing, right?
There's another story we had in the newsletter this week. It was an analysis from SEMrush. It showed that human content is 8 times more likely to rank as number 1 on Google. So that's good news, but there were 2 obvious caveats to this, right?
There's always a caveat.
There's always caveats. So the first is that this research was done with an AI detector tool. Right. Most of these are notoriously unreliable. I'm pretty sure they fed Charles Dickens into it and it's come out as 99% AI generated. And the second is that, that's all very well if you're appearing as number 1 in Google, but Google are actively prioritizing ranking of human content. Great. Which is incredibly ironic given that their aim at the moment is to dominate search queries with AI-generated answers summarising all that human content anyway. So there's a huge clash of business models and business intents there that I would just love to just give people a little bit of a shake over. So human content good, but... People
definitely need to keep an eye out for this zero-click report that we're doing. In partnership with Woodwing, I should add. Because there's a lot about this. There's a lot about Google's intentions and... Does Google care if publishers win or lose? I don't know. But anyway, Google cares that it's got decent search results and human search results in that sense, or human-generated search results are part of that value exchange. So, yeah, it's a complicated story.
This also ties really nicely into a panel that we've got at the Publisher Summit on the 8th of July. We've actually got a panel discussing exactly this. We've got representatives from The Times, Telegraph and Hearst UK. I would love to tell you the names, but I just need to wait another week for that. They're going to talk about quality over quantity and how that's leading to tangible results like this and what they've learned that you can steal.
Oof, ideas worth stealing. Nice one.
Okay, let's get into the interview. So one of Ben's goals when launching Semafor was to rebuild trust in news by being more transparent about what is fact and what is opinion. So I started by asking him how that's played out in reality and how the audience has responded.
We very kind of demonstratively break out the sort of factual section of a story or the scoop from the reporter's view, and then also do kind of amplify the reporter's view and let the journalist have a clear view. And no, we get enormous amounts of feedback on that. I think when you ask people who read us sort of, what's Semafor about, that's often the first thing they bring up. Because I think it really just addresses in this totally direct way something that drives people crazy about many media outlets, which is that you have the sense they're kind of trying to smuggle in an opinion, or they feel like they're not allowed to have an opinion but obviously do, or any of that. And I think people appreciate the kind of acknowledgement of reality almost, and the honesty. And I also find it helps a lot with our sources. Actually, I think when you cover powerful people and decision makers, they know that you're a real human being and that you have views, and sometimes you agree with them and sometimes you disagree with them. And there's something almost more respectful about just being straightforward about that, and also, about leaving room for the potential that your own analysis is wrong and that there are other legitimate points of view, and that's very kind of core to our ethos across everything we do.
Yeah, is that something that the journalists have had to learn a bit more discipline around? Because we all have opinions, we all have bias, and kind of separating that out of saying this portion is fact in however I'm presenting it, and this is kind of where I'm allowed to have an opinion. Does it make it easier when they're allowed to have an explicit opinion to keep the rest kind of more factual?
Yeah, I think so. You don't have to go out and hunt down experts who secretly agree with you and cook up quotes that express your actual views with them. But also, I do think, our journalists tend to be experts. Like, we're definitely kind of heavily tilted toward really, really experienced beat reporters who, whether it's about the U.S. Senate or about Wall Street, like really know what they're talking about and have a lot of confidence in their analysis. But at the same time, aren't fire-breathing partisans. I mean, it doesn't work if the journalist's opinions are that everybody I'm writing about deserves to be in jail. Like, that's a legitimate opinion, but it probably wouldn't work for us.
Yeah. Is there a certain amount of bias that creeps into what stories you choose to cover? I'm thinking in the US particularly, there's a sort of almost breathless coverage of Trump and what goes on with him. Do you find that trust has to be built in what you choose to cover and not cover as well as how you cover it?
That's certainly connected to trust. Also, just connected to having a clear identity as a news organization and knowing who you are and what you cover. And, you guys cover the business of media, and if you were to go start writing, negative stories about some random British politician, people would be confused. And and similarly, we cover, I guess, sort of the geoeconomic stories is the kind of core of what we cover, the kind of intersection of business and politics globally. And so I think we have a lot of permission to cover whatever we feel like in that space. But, but politics in particular often veers into like just really scurrilous personal gossip. And that's not really so much our beat.
No.
Although sometimes that becomes the most important story in the world, and we cover it like everybody else.
I know when Semafor first launched, you said that you're going to target the global, highly educated audiences. I remember thinking at the time, they're not exactly underserved. So I'd love to know how that's played out in reality. Like, has that audience come to you as you expected, or has it evolved a bit differently to how you expected?
I think disagree with your premise. I think there are a lot of people all over the world who are quite unhappy with what they're getting from the news media, and you can tell because if you ask them, they tell you that. And if you look at public opinion polls, they say we hate everything. So I don't think. I don't really buy the premise that you really anywhere. Maybe in Britain, but maybe in Germany, certainly, but nowhere else do you have people who are like, actually, sorry, Scandinavia, they seem very happy. But really almost everywhere in the world, if you ask people, like, do you think the news media is doing a good job? Like 10% say yes, right? So I don't think broadly you're talking about a market where people feel like, wow, like this is amazing. We're getting the best service. There are lots of other industries where if you ask people, like in the auto industry, do you like your car? Like mostly yes, right? So it's not... That's not inevitable. So that's sort of a maybe top level question. I also think the way we've approached building a global news organization is a bit different from kind of the traditional way, which is the kind of colonial way, which is you stick, your flagship in London and then you broadcast out to the provinces and bring everything back to the center. And I think just obviously, if you're building something in 2026, you're building a network, and you're in the point of view, and there's not a sort of clear delineation between what's the periphery and what's the center. They're just different nodes with different perspectives, and so we have a very strong team that we launched with in sub-Saharan Africa. We have a very strong team in the Gulf, and they're right. And I think if you look at those markets, actually in particular, you have great reporters from the FT, the New York Times, places like that, writing amazing dispatches about kind of like what it's like there and what's going on there. And of course, if you live there, you probably know what it's like there and what's going on there. Like that's not that useful to you. Sometimes they're breaking amazing news and huge stories. Which are very hyper relevant in the place as well as informative to an audience that's thousands of miles away. But that's not their main goal. Their main goal is to tell London what it's like in the Gulf or to tell New York what it's like in the Gulf. And for us, the opportunity is to provide independent, really high quality journalism, not that isn't, state owned like a lot of the journalism there, and to do it at the quality level of that global media, independent media, but with an eye to an audience that is in the Gulf or is obsessed with the Gulf, that is in sub-Saharan Africa or is obsessed with it, with great African journalists, great journalists from the place writing. You're in conversation with their sources and with the people they're covering. I mean, I think the old foreign correspondent model really is this assumption that the people who you write about will never see your work, which has led through the years to all sorts of shenanigans. But I think we assume that the people we're writing about are going to see our work, and we're in conversation with them. And I think there's been enormous appetite for those two products. Our Gulf and Africa product have been super successful.
Yeah. What would make another market attractive to you? Because presumably you'd want to put actual people there rather than test an area out first.
Yeah, we just launched our first weekly Asia product, a China newsletter written by a great China correspondent, but very difficult to put people in China. And he spent his whole life there, but is now based in the U.S. We just hired Fortune's Asia editor, who's based in Hong Kong, and I think are starting to look at what a kind of East Asia edition would look like. But we'd obviously, I think Brussels is another obvious place for us, but we're trying to. Justin, my partner, and I have been doing this a while, and one of the things you learn is news it's not an overnight tech business. You've got to build trust. You've got to be careful. You've got to grow in a sort of intentional, careful way, and that's what we're trying to do. And so we're not racing to sort of open up new geographies. Although I think our long-term plan certainly really is to build a global news outlet.
I mean, the landscape itself has changed quite a lot since you launched in 2022.
Has it?
I'd love to know how you're weathering things like discovery challenges. Obviously, AI has, certainly in popular opinion, transformed a lot of the way that people are seeing things going.
We launched it actually in the fall of, it was the fall of 22. Is that right? I guess I feel like we were sort of born into the post-traffic apocalypse era. Like anyone who thought at that point that web traffic wasn't going away, wasn't paying attention. And before AI swallowed it, really TikTok swallowed it. Like short video replaced web browsing as the thing bored people do at work, right? And so I think you could already see by then that the web was really in kind of terminal decline. And, it was an important surface among others, but I think we launched knowing that digital media wasn't sort of coextensive with the World Wide Web. And, newsletters were our first, digital product because it gives you this direct connection to an audience, which, you can then reach in other places. You can reach in person. You can reach all sorts of different places, but isn't dependent on the sort of vicissitudes of this dying medium, which sadly is the web.
What are your thoughts on AI and the way it's infiltrating some publishers? I've seen something this week about Fortune being highly praised for their use of it.
I think the tools are amazing, and we use them all over the place every day for research, for translation, for transcription, for looking at transcripts and saying what's interesting in the transcripts, for predicting mean tweets about stories. I mean, it's good for all sorts of stuff. Without talking about any publishers specifically, in my own experience, if I Google something, like I was working on a story about Larry Summers, the economist, the other day, and wanted to see what other economists had said about interest rates, and so did a Google, like Fed funds rate, Google News search, and all the stories the first stories that come up are paywalled and are obviously AI written. And I'm like, well, I have a Claude subscription. Like I'm not going to pay for a publisher to copy and paste out of Claude. Like I can just go straight to the source here. And I think that's a fatal problem with this. Like if your brand is telling me what you do is you repackage Claude or Chat into web articles, like why? I already pay for Claude and Chat. Like why would I look at that? It's like almost sort of like that's just, I don't even understand what service is being provided there. So I think publishers I think publishers need to be really careful about that. I think you have to really think about what are you providing of value that AI isn't. And fortunately, most of what journalism is that, right? It's new information that is not on the web. That is extremely valuable. It's always been the beating heart of any newsroom is just new information, scoops. It's perspective, it's conversations, it's human things. Sort of generic commodity information. It's been a while. I don't think anybody ever really built a successful digital business just churning scaled commodity information. I think like at its peak, Business Insider was kind of trying to do that, but it just seems like a strange direction for publishers to go right now. And I would say at Semafor, like we're just very focused on, we have super talented reporters who can bring new information, who can bring new insight, who can give an audience definitely is not going to trust some hazy AI brand a sense that they're talking to the knowledge that they're talking to an expert human being. And that's all very positive. And I think this is a funny thing. I mean, I think that's what people come to us for. And so that's what we're investing in. That said, AI tools are incredibly valuable in getting the most out of a great journalist's time. If we can edit her video a lot faster, like that's great. That's a huge win. And AI sort of video editing and transcription tools are amazing.
Your newsletters always have a human or humans writing each section, don't they? And they're quite clearly named as each, almost like being responsible for each section.
Yeah.
You mentioned paywalls. Again, I thought it was very interesting given the caliber of your audience that a paywall isn't kind of in sight yet. I'm curious about where you are with that, again, given the value exchange with a lot of the information you're providing. Is that something that you might consider?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think, one thing, having done this for a little while and been at places that had subscriptions and places that were sold advertising, you realize that whenever people are sort of passionately advocating for one revenue stream over another, they're just talking their own book. And honestly, like, successful media companies have lots of different revenue streams and aren't kind of ideological about them, just manage them as best they can. I think if you think about Disney, like what is the business Disney is in? What is the revenue business Disney is in? It's like, and the answer is like, well, it's, it's in 11 different businesses, each managed like really carefully. And the guy who just took the place over was running, I think, like the theme parks business, right? But they're not a theme park company. They're, whatever they are, they're an IP entertainment company, and that's incredibly good at expressing what it does across a lot of different places. And I think successful media companies are in the advertising business, or in the subscription business, or in the events business. And I think, we're just trying to be very focused on doing not too many things as a startup and to do them really, really well. And secondarily, we feel great about where our advertising business is and about the speed at which our brand is growing. And I think the risk of bringing down a paywall prematurely is that you step on those.
I think you were doing something with the CEO newsletter, though, weren't you? That one was that that's a paid one, almost like a sort of membership club.
It's something different. It's a gated one. It's a sort of it's a qualified audience product. Something I'd never done before, but it's a newsletter which, to be subscribed to, you personally have to be the CEO of a company with $500 million or more in revenue. So we've got several thousand subscribers, which, approaching kind of the total addressable market of the thing. And there's great journalism. Some of the interviews you can read elsewhere, but the core product is really, it's not like one of these Diary of a CEO things that's addressed to people who would like one day to be a CEO or to know what it is like to be a CEO. It's just actually addressed to people who are running big companies. And it's an inside conversation among them that I think they value being part of. And it's sort of freed from the pull of trying to scale. And then it's, of course, very valuable to advertisers because it's a valuable audience.
I bet if they're handpicked, the open rates on that are wonderful.
Yeah, the open rates are, way over 100%, apparently.
Of course.
Actually, I hadn't known this, but you can actually get that if people forward it. So.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I know when I first saw that stat, I was like, come on.
Events been a real hit for you. I think I read recently it was more than half of your revenue. And I think these days that's still more unusual for a news company to have that percentage of events as like to have events being that important. Was that part of your early plan, or has that very much come from seeing the momentum in those areas and leaning into it?
Yeah, I would say they're about half our revenue, and kind of more or less on the month by month. And my partner Justin Smith, no relation, started the Atlantic's events business in Washington in the 90s, built these huge events at Bloomberg, and it's a very kind of specialized part of media. I mean, it's not, I came up as a blogger where you're like, should I put pants on today or not? Like, that's the big decision, logistically speaking. So I don't want to take too much credit in a way. Like, I think we've built this, I think it's a moment when people really want to come together in person when for whatever reason there's a lot of space at the top of that market, sort of the same as our journalism, like that there's the sort of most discerning readers, the most connected people are looking for places to have really high level conversations. And we have a 5-day convening in Washington that's Semafor World Economy. It's 500 global CEOs and more than half of the Trump cabinet, global finance ministers and central bankers. It'll be 3 stages, 5 full days, all simultaneous. I mean, it's this huge scale event and lots of great conversations in the hallways, and just an enormous festival of news too. I think we'll have reporters from all over doing the interviews, but certainly picking them up. And I think the thing that I've certainly learned, I guess I would say almost the thing that I was worried about and that I've been most gratified by, is that the thing that makes the events work is the journalism. It's what gives you permission to host them. And I had some, there's a kind of event that you go to and it's like marketers interviewing each other and they don't ask any hard questions and it's really boring.
Yeah.
And I had not having done this before, some hesitation around, like, maybe that's a feature, not a bug. Like, maybe you can only get people to come to these things if you ask extremely boring questions. But the reality is that, like, senior politicians, senior business leaders, they are bored by boring questions too. They're very, very, very well prepared to take hard questions. It's what they do. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm interviewing, the Secretary of the Treasury and the Secretary of Commerce at our event, and there's no sense from them of like, oh no, you can't ask us hard questions. Like they can give as good as they can get, and that's what it's what they do professionally. And so, yeah, we break a lot of news. We have really interesting, tough, kind of adult conversations, and it's really satisfying.
If you were looking at launching Semafor again today, or advising anybody else who's looking at launching a new startup, is there anything you'd do differently or any advice you'd give?
I think in a way the thing that we didn't see as clearly as we see now is what a fool's errand scale is in media right now. And this, these things change, and I don't think there's like anybody's going to like figure out media permanently. But in this moment, it's very, very challenging to build the kind of scale for quality journalism that you maybe could 10 years ago on the web. And so you really have to be thinking hard about the quality of the audience and who you're reaching, whether you're subscription or whether you're whether you're ad driven. It's just the extent to which the tech platforms have totally consolidated that digital advertising business. It is just no point, and so you're just not going to build a business that can support quality journalism, at least by trying to compete with Google for traffic. And when I was at BuzzFeed, that was our strategy, and we got some of the way there. And now I think that's just clearly not in the cards. And it's a very different approach. You're thinking really hard about who your audience is and connecting to them very directly.
Thanks so much to Ben for joining us on the podcast. Now, they actually have their own media podcast too, if you want to add it to your listening queue after ours, of course. It's called Mixed Signals and features Ben and their media reporter, Max Tanney, who we've also had on here before.
Yeah, Max is brilliant. I love Max.
He's great. They also do a great newsletter off the back of that. But if you want the key learnings from this interview in writing, just head to voices.media or make sure you're signed up to our newsletter to get it straight to your inbox every Tuesday.
And remember, monetizing B2B is in May. If you get on it now, you can still grab a seat. Our publisher summits are coming up in July. Early bird rates on this are ending soon. My life is flashing before my eyes. And of course, our newsletter awards are still open for another week. All links and dates are at voices.media/events.
Who have we got next week, Peter?
This one was great. This was a lot of fun. Next week's guest is Variety publisher Dia Lawrence. She was a lot of fun. Her energy is properly infectious. So if you don't know, Variety is Hollywood's paper of record. It's more than 120 years old. I spoke to Dia about its origins in editorial independence. Basically, its founder, Sime Silverman, told his boss to shove it when he complained about negative coverage of an advertiser. And he went off and founded Variety, where he had complete control. So we spoke about what Mr. Silverman might still recognise in a publication more than a century later, even after the explosion of digital entertainment formats and the publication's international expansion, because Hollywood is not what it used to be.
Until then, you can keep up with all things Media Voices by following us on LinkedIn and subscribing to the publisher newsletter over on voices.media. And we'll see you next week.
Bye. We've never had a decent sign-off.
Not since
Ever.
Brexit, no.
Oh yeah, that was a good one.